Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mena Ruparel, although for some reason, when you look at your box on screen, it says that Connor Dempsey is talking, and I'm joined today with by Julian Hall. Hi, Julian.
Hi there.
Just a few bits and pieces to start. You have various things on that control panel that you can see, and I would encourage you to make use of them. There's a box that says questions, and you can click your mouse into that box and ask us questions. You can send the questions privately, which means that only Julian and I can see the question, or you can send to all, which means that every single person who's taking the webinar today sees your question. Julian, when the time is appropriate, will read the questions out and answer them. So it may be that at the end of a slide you've got a question and Julian can answer the question when he gets to the end of the slide, or you may have general questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll take as much time as we can to answer the questions. If any of the questions are outstanding, we're going to put them onto the Law CPD Solutions LinkedIn group, and Julian's going to attempt to answer those questions to the best of his ability after the webinar. There's also a chat facility. Julian's going to encourage us to have a chat about stress and how we feel about stress and things that can bring stress on. So when he throws a question out, if you type a question into the chat box, again you can choose whether the entire audience sees it, or there's a drop down menu that says that you can send it to the organisers or only to Julian if you want to. If you have any other questions, then either use the question or chat facilities and ask us directly. So that's all the housekeeping bits and bobs. Hopefully everyone can hear us. I haven't got any messages that there are any problems with the audio. Julian's waiting on the other end to start his presentation, but I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to say that I met Julian a few years ago online by taking one of the two tests that he's got on his website. He has a stress test and he has an anger test. I'll leave it to everybody to figure out which of those two tests I took, but I took one of his tests and we connected on LinkedIn, and we've known each other for a few years. I thought it was a good idea to ask Julia to do a webinar with us because CPD for lawyers is changing and has changed over the last year, and really it's really important for people to think about other things to do CPD about, not just legal topics and legal subjects. And this is a perfect example of things that people need to know more about stress, which would help them in their work and also in their private life. So Julian, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. And if I can just say, well, first of all, thank you very much for all of you people here coming online to listen to me. And thank you very much to Mena for inviting me to speak. Brief bit of background into Calm People. We are stress, conflict and anger management specialists. We package that up under the heading of emotional resilience, because if we're emotionally resilient, then actually we deal with stress better, we don't find ourselves in conflict, and you don't need specialists like me to help you. I come into contact with lawyers in one of two ways. Either occasionally they invite their clients to come and see me on a one-to-one or a group basis for them to deal with their anger issues. The more regular contact I have with lawyers, though, is the same contact I have with normal businesses that we work in, which is where we go into businesses and we deliver workshops on resilience, dealing with stress, dealing with conflict, and all the other emotional issues that we have as human beings. Calm People have been going now for 5 years. Really enjoy what we're doing, and I'm really enjoying being here to speak to you today.
Thanks, Julian.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I totally forgot. This webinar attracts 1 hour CPD. So I was talking about CPD and I forgot to say that solicitors can claim this as 1 hour CPD for their annual allowance. So I will let you move on to your first slide.
Excellent, thank you. So really what I want to do here is just talk you through the objective of this session. So my intention is that by the end of this session you will know more about stress. Crucially, I'm hoping that you will know more about your relationship with it, and you'll have a couple of key tips that you can start using to rebalance stress in your life as well. Okay. Now, in 45 to 50 minutes, we're not going to deal with stress all in one go for you, but what I'm hoping is we're going to give you some key information and some really, really good understanding of what's going on for you when you get stressed. Most of my work comes from one very simple key principle for me, which is that 80% of the stress that I suffer is about me. It's not about anybody else. Okay. Now, when I used to hear people say that, and when I was learning about it and doing my own personal development, I used to have a little bit of an emotional reaction, because at that point I was very much in the victim mode, and I didn't want someone telling me that actually I could take control of this, and actually essentially I was the one that's responsible for it. But I have learned over time that 80% of the stress that I'm under is about me and my relationship with myself. Now, there's still another 20% that other people in the world want to give us, and I can't do anything about those people. But of course, if I deal with the stress that I bring into my life, that's the 80%, then you know what, the 20% other people want to give me, that's pretty much a walk in the park. So my intention is to open your minds up to that today and give you some tips that you can start on your journey for dealing with stress.
Great, thanks, Julian.
Okay, so the agenda, what we're going to go through. In brief, we're going to look at some facts to do with stress, and we're going to have some background numbers and figures for that as well. Then we're going to look at the good, the bad and the ugly, because stress gets a bad name and it's not all bad. So we want to get some understanding of the benefits of it. Crucially, what it does to us, and then how it arises and the effects it has in terms of the way we communicate and the culture that we generate through our businesses and back at home as well. And then we'll actually look at what the big picture is for us in terms of our stress. And I'll introduce you to a model that talks about how we draw stress and build it up into our lives. Okay, and all the time whilst I'm doing this, Mena will probably be saying things like, so how does this apply to law? How does this apply to lawyers? How does this apply to lawyers' clients as well? To keep you focused on the fact that, you know, these are some professionals who are listening to this and you have a particular perspective on what's going on. The final thing I'll say before I move off this slide is that if we go onto a slide and I'm talking about it and you have a burning question you'd like to ask about the slide, please type it into the chat box. I will keep my eye on the chat box and I will try to pick up on those questions and address them as they come along. If I don't address a question, the chances are, well, it's one of four reasons. Either I haven't seen it, or actually I don't know the answer, but that's unlikely, or actually we're going to get back to it later. Okay, but if any of those reasons don't apply, which is only three reasons, then the fourth part is I'll answer it straight away because it'll be really interesting and there'll be somebody else on this conference that wants to hear an answer as well. Okay.
Thanks, Julian. So, some numbers. You've got these bizarre numbers for us, Julian. What do they mean?
Okay, yeah, these bizarre numbers. These are all about stress. So the first number, and I'll just explain to you, I put stats into presentations. I don't particularly like stats, but I know people like to know some of the stats. So £12 billion, that's the cost of absence to the UK economy every year. Okay, so that's the cost to the businesses in the UK economy for people going off ill. Okay. The next statistic, 24, this is quite an astounding one for me, particularly if you work in a medium-sized to smaller law practice. Average days lost per case for stress is 24 days. So if someone in your business is going to go off ill with stress, it's unlikely to be for just a couple of days. The average days lost in one go is 24 days, which for a small to medium-sized practice can have quite an extreme impact upon the workload of the people who are left behind.
So that's nearly 5 weeks. So losing a fee earner or even a secretary for 5 weeks, and a lot of people will say losing a secretary for 5 weeks is actually more stressful than losing a fee earner. It's a long time to be coping without somebody who, in a small business, you're right, you're going to need that person on board, aren't you?
You've got it, yeah, absolutely. 25% of the salary, that's the average cost of filling a vacancy, and that was a survey from HR Review in 2010. I don't expect that figure has realistically gone down. And in that cost, of course, you've got built-in things like training and, you know, getting somebody else up to speed when you've been left with a vacancy. But there's also the added issues about, of course, the cost of somebody getting less efficient as they work under greater and greater levels of stress and cope with it less and less. So there's lots of different costs built in here.
Julian, I've just got a question that I think is relevant. I'll read it out just in case you haven't seen it. So the person asking the question says, are the number of days lost unique to legal practice, or can this be applicable to other SMEs?
Okay, absolutely. And these figures came from the Health and Safety Executive, and they're across all businesses in the UK. So it's not, those figures aren't specifically applicable to law. And Mena, thank you for that, because I haven't seen that question come up in the chat box, so I'll need you to keep an eye on the questions.
Absolutely, that's fine. So yeah, this is across the board, not just lawyers. These are the days lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, the 40%, it's a very simple figure that it's 40% of 12 billion. In other words, that's the percentage of overall absence in the workplace that is related to stress. So if we're looking at 12 billion in 2008, well, 40% of that would have come to, by my calculations, 4.8 billion pounds. And as the economy goes into recovery and therefore the economy grows, actually that figure is going to become a higher figure because it's a percentage figure. So there's some big numbers there that are to do with stress, but of course those are numbers that can apply in a microcosm to any business, any SME, and any practice of lawyers.
And of course, Julian, something that I mentioned to you before is that it's obviously going to be much cheaper for firms, even small to medium-sized firms, to spend a bit of money trying to ensure that people aren't stressed, or if they are stressed, they help them with their stress, rather than going down this road of maybe ignoring the stress and not helping people. To the extent I've heard of some businesses employing somebody who comes around and gives everybody a massage for 10 minutes once a week. You know, there are always novel ways for firms to introduce a stress policy, but they need to be aware of the problems in the first place, don't they?
Definitely, yeah, and absolutely. Even the idea, I know a couple of really outstanding wellness companies that will bring people in to give at the chair massages for people to de-stress them in the workplace and things like that. And yeah, and the workshops that we do, especially for lawyers, we tend to say that if you can just get each fee earner billing an extra 6-minute period each week as a result of them being more efficient and less stressed, then you've easily paid for any workshop that we're going to do for people.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, so what we've got here is the top 3 causes for stress that are self-reported in the workplace. I thought I'd like to throw a question out to you. Now, bear in mind the fact that for some reason I can't see the questions as they come up on the screen, but Mena can see them. And the question I'd like to give you really is just, what are the stresses that you are under? And when I ask that, I'm thinking, as a person, either in work or out of work, and also applicable to your particular workplace, what are the stresses, the main causes of stress that you're having to deal with in your workplace? Okay, so if you type that into the chat box, then you can decide who that's going to go out to, either the entire audience or whether just Mena and I will see it, and then we can maybe talk through a couple of those answers that we get.
And in the meantime, I was saying to you earlier, wasn't I, Julian, before we started this webinar, that because I predominantly work from home unless I'm in court or if I'm going off to give a lecture somewhere, that one of the stresses I had just before we started was the fact that I have a small cat who is wandering around my house, and I had a big fear that she was going to jump onto the desk, start purring into the microphone, and maybe make sure that everybody was logged out of the webinar before it even started. It's a strange thing to be stressed about, but actually that's one of the things that I get stressed about. A lot of people have answered this question, and so some people have said it's the volume of work that they get stressed about. Some people have said difficult cases, and I think all of us can understand that when you've got a difficult case or a difficult client, it takes up a huge proportion of your time worrying about it. Targets, I don't suppose that's a strange one to you, Julian, and prioritising work tasks. Making mistakes, the fear of making mistakes, particularly in the first 3 years post-qualification, is really overwhelming. It's something that I used to think about day and night. Relationships with colleagues, so quite a few answers there, Julian.
Yeah, they're great, and those none of those are any surprise to me. in terms of they fit in very nicely with the model that we're going to introduce you to later. So those people that typed those questions, please type those answers. Keep those answers in your mind as we get to about 5 or 6 slides on when we look at this model, because you'll start to see the relationship between this model and the relationship between the stress that you are under. Those of you that didn't type an answer, well, I guess you were still thinking about it, and you've got a fair idea of the stresses that come into your life, and you'll be able to apply that as well to the model that we're going to show you later on.
There's
Okay.
another one that's just popped up, which is time pressures to complete work. And again, we're all working under deadlines. So work stresses are very prevalent in terms of time pressures, targets, getting on with other people. That seems to be the general theme with what people are saying, Julian.
Definitely, yeah. And my understanding working within the legal profession is that the legal profession is that, you know, you're not all the way that it's painted by the media in terms of billing for everything. So of course the time pressures mean that actually what happens is people do an awful lot of work outside of their normal working hours that they probably don't bill for. And the impact that has, of course, is that gives them less time and space outside of work in their life, and that creates additional pressure and additional stresses back at home.
So tell us, Julian, what are the top 3 causes of stress?
Let's go for the grand reveal, shall we?
Yeah.
Number 3 is actually, I'm sure you don't get this in your law practices, but it's violence, threats and bullying. It's that accounted for in this particular survey 54,000 cases, which is quite immense, really. Maybe most of those were traffic wardens, I don't know. But number 2 is lack of managerial support, and I can really relate to that. Not that I've ever been poorly supported as a manager, but in my previous career, where I had 21 years working in financial services, I was probably that manager that didn't support people as well as I could have done. So I can really relate to how having a lack of managerial support can increase the stress for people. And then finally, the top one, and which was cited in the answers that we got there as well, was workload, which includes things like tight deadlines, too much work to do, too much pressure, and in some cases too much responsibility as well. So, and that's 186,000 cases. That's outstanding that people feel that the workload is too high for them. Okay. So, what I'd like to do now is move on a little bit further and just talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so what you'll hopefully see on the screen in a second is a graph. Okay, and of course what we all know is that if you put something in a graph, that obviously makes it true, which is what we've done here. Okay, joking aside, this graph and this work comes from a very interesting man called Hans Selye. Now, Hans Selye is a man, he's a psychologist and a scientist who was responsible for bringing the word stress in response to a stress response within humans into the English language in the 1960s. Now, up until then, the word stress was used really to describe the pressure you would put on objects, such as a steel bar. If you were bending it, that would be under some stress. However, through the work that he did experimenting on rats and on humans, Selye brought this word stress into our language. And what he said actually was that there's 2 types of stress. There's a positive form of stress and there's a negative form of stress. And what Selye did for us is he said that he decided to name those. And on the left-hand side of the graph, what you can see is that as stress increases, performance improves. And that's what he found in general through his work. So he called that EU stress or eustress. To help me remember it or remember the origins of it, I tend to think of it as EU being the start of the word euphoric. It's that form of euphoric stress. I'm working faster, I'm working harder. Actually, I'm really quite enjoying being under that stress. Okay.
And I was talking to somebody about that earlier today. It's when you're busy enough to keep yourself going, but you're not so busy that you fall into distress, which is the next thing I guess you're coming on to speak to us. It's that positive feeling, maybe not euphoric, Julian, certainly not for me, but it kind of keeps you motivated and keeps you going to do the things that you need to do.
Definitely, definitely. And of course, we all have a tipping point. And the bad news I've got for you today is that I can't predict for you what your tipping point is. We all have a responsibility to understand what stresses us, understand what our tipping point is, and do our best for our own health and well-being to make sure that we stay behind the curve on the tipping point. And anybody who's been over the other side and has actually ended up in distress, which is so much stress that I can't cope, then they'll know what a deep and dark place that is and how they never ever want to go there again. And I work with quite a few people who've been there, and they spend an immense amount of effort making sure they get nowhere near their tipping point ever again, because that experience of slipping into distress was such a painful experience for them.
I would say that a lot of lawyers would be able to confirm that they have tipped over, and maybe some people who are listening today are in that state of distress and are looking for some answers by watching the webinar today.
Yeah, absolutely, and we can give them answers, and the good news is that you can always recover from it. It's just I would prefer it if my life's work is about trying to make sure people don't end up in distress anymore. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, and this is a discussion I always like to have with people, and I wonder again if anybody wants to respond by typing into the chat box. The question I really ask here, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about this, is what for you is the difference between pressure and stress? What's the difference between actually being under pressure and being under stress? And crucially for me is what's the key thing that links those two together?
I find that very difficult to answer. I would find it difficult to say what's stress versus pressure, because they feel as though they're two very closely linked things.
They are, and what happens is the sort of answers we'll be getting, and we may see coming up, is things like people will say, well, actually pressure's that positive side of stress, and stress itself is the negative side of it.
Yeah. And one person has said it's the control or the sense of control. So one thing is you've got control over what you're doing, or you've got a sense of control. Somebody else has said pressure is a lot to do, but I know how to do it and I just need time to do it. So, being in control a bit. Stress is things I'm not sure how to tackle, or other people's expectations.
Other people's expectations. That's an interesting one as well. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for those answers, and thank you for the engagement we're getting in this. So for me, and I'm giving you an opinion here because we are in the realms of opinion, but please bear with me. Given the amount of work I've done in this field, then it's a fairly well-formed opinion. But I'm playing with words a little bit here. But for me, pressure is definitely the good side of stress. We're all under pressure. We all have pressures to deal with. And pressure is that thing that motivates me. I often draw it into my own life. I often put myself under pressure in order to achieve more and to be more efficient. Okay. What turns pressure into stress is me. What turns pressure into stress is my relationship with me. And we're back to that 80%, which is actually the way I choose to deal with the pressures that come my way is what's going to decide how much stress I bring into my life. And for me, that's a very, very important description, because again, it firmly plants at my feet the responsibility for me to deal with my stress. The positive side of that is, of course, it gives me the power to deal with my stress. It means I'm the person who can deal with it, and I don't need to blame anybody else for it.
What's interesting is that somebody has said here, Julian, that stress can involve fear. And I really connect to what that person has said, is that you feel that stress is fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing what to do next, not knowing how to handle a situation.
Great, that's brilliant. And they're clearly someone who's in touch at a feelings and emotions level, and they've actually taken a tiny bit of my material from the next slide, actually, because that is absolutely it. One of the first things I wanted to talk about. So if we go on to the next slide, one of the first things I wanted to talk about is the fact that of the core feelings that we as humans are hardwired with, stress is linked directly to fear. Okay, so that means that we tend to be either scared that something is going to happen, or we're scared that something isn't going to happen. Okay, and stress is fundamentally rooted in fear. So thank you very much for that point made by that person. This visual here is just for me to talk for a few minutes about the origins of stress. And whenever I talk through this slide, I always say that if there's anybody out there listening to me who is fundamentally committed to a religion, when I talk about this part of the subject, I don't talk about it in order to offend people. I talk about it just to give context for my work and what we're dealing with. And the reason I say that is that I look at it from an evolutionary perspective, and not everybody agrees with the theory of evolution. Okay, but I like to use it to describe how stress has come into our life and into our being. So the theory of evolution says that we've got what's called a triune brain. In other words, it's a brain that's in 3 stages, and it's 3 stages that map out the broad stages of our evolution. So what we've got is we've got a tiny, tiny part of our brain called the amygdala. Okay, that formed when we came out of the primordial swamp as almost a lizard-type organism. Over millions of years then we evolved into apes, and then over millions of more years we evolved into the fine figures of humans that are interacting on the internet with me today. Okay, so it's not a bad thing to look at yourself. You can look at yourself in the mirror and say, look, I'm the pinnacle of evolution. Okay, if you can ever have a pinnacle of evolution. Okay, but back to the lizard. If you've ever seen a lizard in the wild, then they absolutely act out what our stress response is, because that's linked to that part of the brain that controls what we call our fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay, and most people have heard that phrase, fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, and we call that the lizard brain. And the reason for that is that you can see it in lizards, they act it out. If you walk towards a lizard in the wild, it will freeze. That's the first thing it does to work out whether you're dangerous or not. Walk a bit closer, it'll run away. If you actually try and pick it up, you'll discover they've got very, very sharp teeth. They are prepared to fight, but it's their last resort. Now, if we move evolution on a few million years, and we're now in our cave people stage, and a caveman, cavewoman stage, running through the jungle on a hunting expedition, we come across a woolly mammoth, our famous foe. Well, that fight, flight, or freeze will now save our life. And it'll help us decide whether or not we are going to freeze and hope it doesn't notice us, whether we're going to run fast in the same bolt, or whether actually what we're going to do is we're going to fight it. In this example, I've decided I'd like a new rug for the floor of my cave, so I am going to fight it. But before I do that, I want us then to evolve a few million years further on, and we're now in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, I don't know if you've noticed, but there aren't that many woolly mammoths around. The last one I saw, I think, was in the entrance to the British Museum when I was a little child. So, you know, I'm using irony to illustrate a point, but the point is that through technological evolution and through health and safety evolution, actually we've minimised life and death risk down to virtually nothing for us. Okay? But what we've still got in our brains is this outdated technology that measures everything through life or death risk. So it means that fairly normal day-to-day issues can suddenly become very, very stressful because we've got this part of the brain that arms us and readies us for battle. Okay. Now, what happens then when we get armed and ready for battle is that we have 2 key hormones that start coursing through our body. The first one is adrenaline. Everyone's aware of adrenaline. That speeds me up, it focuses me, it makes me really, really, you know, armed and ready for battle. The other one is a hormone called cortisol, and that's got 2 separate properties that again are to do with the way we've evolved. The first one is that it's pain relief. It's almost one of the most powerful pain relievers on the planet, because if I'm going to fight a woolly mammoth, I'm not going to get away without a scratch or 2, and I don't want to feel pain. Okay, because that slows me down and makes me less efficient. The other thing is that it's a blood clotting agent, and of course, you know, again, this is evolution helping us, because when I fight animals, I get cut. I don't want to bleed to death afterwards. So we've got all these hormones coursing through our body, and what we're trying to do is deal with those in the 21st century. Okay. So where was I going to go with that? Well, I guess then if I come forward to the 21st century, and I'll share with you that I'm a middle-aged man. Maybe I've had 1 too many cooked breakfasts in my life, and I've decided I'm going to get myself out on a fitness regime. My first challenge I decided to get myself fit and to kickstart my campaign is to challenge the office junior to a game of squash. And before you know it, there I am on this court, chasing this little piece of green rubber around, out of breath, being flung everywhere by this 21-year-old expert in the court. And I'm putting my body under all this pressure, and I've got a blood clotting agent going through my veins. And there I am heading towards my first heart attack possibly. And therein lies the link between stress and heart attack and stroke. Okay. Before I carry on, or as I start to talk, I don't know, has anybody been writing any questions in about that slide at all, Mena?
Well, I think given that we're having a lunchtime webinar, someone has pointed out that they're being put under an enormous amount of pressure by somebody trying to get their attention for something that isn't urgent when they know they're in the middle of a webinar. But I think people are gripped, as am I, by the kind of scientific explanation as to the way that our bodies react, and I can really see how you would, if not that I'm saying that you are, Julian, but you would be heading towards a heart attack or a stroke. And it really reminds me of a book that I read, which was the true life story of a lawyer, I think in America, and it's called The Monk Who Stole My Ferrari. And it's exactly that type of scenario that you're posing. You know, in that case, he was a very fat, overweight lawyer who was very used to just sitting at his desk and was heading towards a major heart attack, who decided that the way to deal with his stress, and I'm sure lots of people have felt like this, was just to walk away from it all, to walk away from the law and walk away from his office. And he became a Buddhist monk and came back to the office looking 20 years younger, much fitter, much healthier, because his body wasn't suffering from the stresses and strains of everyday life. And it is the body being flooded by these hormones, as you say.
It is, absolutely. And just to finish off on this slide, those hormones are quite a toxic combination in our bloodstream as well. They've only ever been designed to be in the bloodstream for a very, very short period of time. So, for example, if I think of a modern day stress, when I might cross the road and I suddenly, I've been daydreaming and I find myself, standing in front of a car bearing down on me on the road, that fight, flight or freeze is going to save my life and get me out of the way of that vehicle very, very quickly. Now, what happens is I stand on the roadside and I start breathing very, very heavily, and probably my breathing levels are probably slightly raised for about 20 minutes, and that's me processing those hormones out of my system. Okay, it's what's called our sympathetic nervous system kicks in with the adrenaline and the cortisol, and then when I process it out of my system, that's my parasympathetic nervous system bringing my body back into balance. Okay, now that's okay for a short instant and a burst of adrenaline and cortisol, but because of the lifestyle we live these days and the way that our body reacts and our senses react to almost anything, there's those of us, including myself at times in my life, who have spent days, weeks, months and years under stress, ruminating, worrying, not sleeping properly, etc., etc. And we are now in that area where we are putting ourselves under stress, and it's affecting our health because cortisol and adrenaline together attack our immune system. So whilst you're under stress, you're immunosuppressed.
The interesting thing is that one of the things that immediately comes to mind for me is, as a family solicitor, if I get a letter from another solicitor that's written in a certain tone or suggests something that I don't think is appropriate or anything, I can really feel my body going into a kind of stressful situation where I feel as though I've got these hormones in my system, but it's the slightest thing that could trigger that, and it doesn't have to be nearly being knocked down on the street by a car. It could be just something that comes across your desk that you don't react that well to.
You've got it. Or even I imagine maybe you're sitting at your desk in your office and the partner does that thing where they stick their head in the door, says to you, can I have a quiet word? And then they close the door and walk off, waiting for you to join them. And there's millions of people all over the world that are put into fight, flight or freeze response just by that alone, let alone all the other stresses they have going on in their lives. So we're complicated beings, and we're getting ever more complicated the more we evolve. Okay, so should we move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
A gentle illustration of actually what happened to me when I was under stress. I worked in financial services for 21 years. I had an immensely successful career, and I actually managed to work for huge amounts of time under stress. I worked very successfully under stress. What I didn't do was successfully deal with stress, which is something completely different. The graph there, you've got stress going up the left-hand side. The bottom line, it's chopped it off on the presentation, but that's actually time. And in this graph, what it shows you, the starting point of the graph is how stressed I am at a point in time. The third point on the graph, which is about 2/3 down, is actually what we call our healthy level of stress. And Sally said that we all need a healthy level of stress to actually thrive and survive. Okay. What's happening as you look at the second point on the graph where my stress goes up is an event that's going to happen in about 2 weeks' time, and that's my summer holiday. Okay. Now, what used to happen to me when I was 2 weeks away from my summer holiday was that several things went through my mind. I didn't say them, but it was my behaviours that demonstrated them. The first one was I thought I was indispensable. Okay. I thought that despite working for an organisation that had £1 billion of assets and 18,000 staff, actually if I didn't dot every I and cross every T before I went away on holiday, probably the whole place would fall apart without me. Okay. That was the sort of pressure I would put myself under. And in addition to that, whilst I didn't say it, I acted as if all the people who worked for me were complete incompetent idiots. In other words, I had a complete inability to delegate anything. So
You sound
what
like
that
a
meant,
fantastic manager, Julian.
wasn't I good? So of course what that meant was that the build up to my holiday, I then put myself under even more stress to make sure everything was perfect so as I could go and enjoy my holiday. The graph goes down quite steeply once I get on the plane and I have my first gin and tonic. It goes over about 4 days. It goes down to that point where I reach my healthy level of stress. And that's where I would walk out of the villa or the hotel, I'd stretch and say to people, I feel like I've finally relaxed. You know? And a lot of people can relate to that coming down process that they have when they've been under stress and they go away on holiday. And then I'd spend about another 5 days going to an even lower level of stress. And this is what Sally referred to as homeostasis. He said that's our recharging process. That's us recharging our batteries for dealing with stress. Classically, that's when I'd get a cold or I'd come out in spots or I'd get a heat rash or something like that. And then about 5 days before the end of this 2-week holiday, of course, you can see the graph going upwards. And what's happening there is that I'm now starting to check my BlackBerry by the side of the pool. I'm starting to wonder about all the incompetent people I left behind. I'm starting to worry about the mess that I'm going to find when I get back off my holiday. So I don't truly enjoy the holiday for the last 5 days. And I get back to work. You know what? It's as if nothing's changed. I might as well have not gone away. And that was my experience of stress. And when I explain this to people, people often go, yeah, that's exactly how it is for me. The question I'll ask you, Mena, is who asked me to behave like that? Who said I should behave like that?
You did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about me. This is why I love this subject. It's all about me. You know? But seriously, you know, that was all about me. Nobody told me to behave like that. It was all about me and what I thought of myself and what I thought of work. So again, because it's me, I can undo it, and that's the really, really good news.
I'm sure there are people sitting at home, Julian, or in their offices rather, saying to themselves, well, it's all very well, you were working for a company that had so many staff and so many assets. If you're working for a small solicitors firm, you may very well be the only person who is capable of doing the work. And in fact, you know, you have to be on call 24 hours a day, because nobody else is there to deal with the work because it's just you. You might be the only person in your department. It may be that the client only wants to communicate with you. What would you respond to those sorts of comebacks to you regarding this issue?
I would say, first of all, they're all perfectly valid. And I now work in a small business of my own creation, and I can relate to those pressures and stresses. What I would say is, knowing what I know about stress and what I know about myself, is that if I challenge myself sufficiently, I'll be able to find a solution to it. And it's really about me looking to create healthy boundaries between my work and my life. And it's about me perhaps preparing to have some really challenging conversations with myself about actually, you know, how big my ego is and how much people really do need me on call 24 hours a day. And also what facilities there are out there for people like locums or backup services or telephone answering services. Any forms of relief that can take the pressure off me and allow me to have the time that I'm entitled to as well, then I would explore those. Okay. The crucial thing is not for me to sit there and make myself a victim of my own stress.
Thanks, Julian.
Okay. So if we look at the next slide, this is where I'd like to talk you through this model, and this is what I call the 5 pillars of stress. And these are the 5 ways that we draw in and perpetuate and support stress in our own lives. And, you know, well, my hope is, and the reality for me when I explain it to most people, is that people really start to get their relationship with stress when they look at this model. So what I'd like to do is just talk you through that. The first pillar is approval. Now, what that really means is that this is my need for approval of other people. That might be my need for my approval from my boss. It might be my need for approval from my clients. It might be my need for approval from my children and my wife. It could be anything, but there's a huge amount of us out there that seek the approval of other people, either through our work or through our actions. And we draw stress into our lives by worrying too much about what people think of us. Okay. The second one is priority. Now, we find that quite a lot of people have a challenge with this in terms of understanding their own relationship with it. But in brief, this is me not making myself a priority. So, for example, it's me having 101 things to do and not having healthy boundaries. So one of my colleagues then squeals help and asks me to rescue them because they're going under. I put down my 101 things and I go and rescue them. And then 2 hours later, I've still got those 101 things on my to-do list to do. And I've got even less time to do them. And I've now increased my levels of stress because I didn't think that my work, my goals, my tasks were as important as other people's. Okay, and often it's a very, very clear boundary issue in terms of us not setting clear boundaries between our work or our personal life and other people's.
What's really interesting, Julian, is that a couple of people have mentioned in answering your questions priority. So someone said, you know, I'm trying to watch this webinar and someone's trying to interrupt me. That's priority. That's, do I watch the webinar or do I let somebody else interrupt me? And the other thing, which is the priority of work. You know, when you are a lawyer, whatever your area of practice, you know, every day your priorities have to change. And I think it means that it can be stressful because it's not just prioritising your work. It may be a partner says, well, you need to go to court for me now. You need to issue this. A client comes in and says, I'm more important than your other clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about our boundaries. And sometimes, and by the way, we're not going to resolve all these issues of people's stress today because behind this thought process is some very challenging questions that you can ask yourself to challenge yourself to take responsibility for that stress. But I guess just to answer a couple of those, I guess the lunch hour one, for instance, is that it's interesting. I imagine if you're in a client conference with someone, you're unlikely to be interrupted. Whereas if you're on your lunch hour, you're fair game. And it's this starting to understand that the boundaries are important around all the parts of our life and all the parts of our work. Because, you know what, if a lunch hour wasn't important, we wouldn't have health and safety legislation that prescribed that we're allowed one. We'd just say it doesn't matter. But the fact is, a lot of us choose not to take one, and we blur the boundaries, and we make ourselves less of a priority. The next one is pressure. It's very simple that this is the pressure that we put ourselves under. For instance, that might be the pressure that I was putting myself under before I started this webinar. You know, the pressure, again, for me to perform in the best way I can and give the best value I can, I put myself under quite a bit of pressure, which I recognise, okay? And most people can recognise the pressure that they put themselves under. The third one, quite a few of the issues that were raised earlier on in this as people talked about their stresses would directly correlate to this, which is control. This is me feeling out of control or me not being willing to let go of control. And you'll notice the language I'm using, it's very clear and it's very clean. This is all about me and my relationship with stress. I'm not saying people don't give me control. Yeah? What I'm saying is I either don't let go of control or I feel out of control, but it's all my issue. And I think there's plenty of people out there who would subscribe to the phrase control freak, and that one is there for them. Finally, trust is a really interesting one. It breaks into two. And that may be, and is exhibited on that graph actually, is that, you know, do I trust other people But the other stress is actually maybe whether I trust myself. So that might apply to the person who's newly promoted into a job, and actually they're not sure they actually trust themselves to be 100% good at the job immediately, for instance. Or it might be to the person like myself who finds it difficult to delegate because I don't trust people. Yeah? Now, what happens is that any stress that we're under actually will relate to one or more of those. This is the big picture, okay? And we can deal all day long with the individual stresses, but actually if we start to reposition our relationship with the big picture, what we do is we start to make and effect fundamental change in our lives. If I give you an example, well, let me use the example of I'm late for an appointment. I hate being late for appointments. Well, suddenly as I start to feel stressed as I'm sitting in my car in a traffic jam, the approval pillar's there because I'm worried about what people will think of me if I'm late. The pressure pillar's there because I've started putting myself under pressure to get there on time and I'm not going to do it. And the control pillar's there because I'm feeling out of control and I can't control the traffic. And there may even be the trust element because I don't trust other people to run the meeting in the same way that I would run it. Yeah? So one instance of stress can reveal with me my relationship with 3 or 4 fundamental parts of the big picture. Okay. I'd like to move on now and talk a little bit more then about the behaviours that come out when we're under stress. And Mena, if you just reveal those behaviours, please, and I'll talk through a couple of them. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just some of the ones that either I've experienced or classically that our clients experience when they're under unhealthy stress. And I thought I'd pick up on 2 or 3. One of them, the overeating or the undereating. Neither's healthy. But people who overeat, people who comfort eat, tend to be jealous of those that don't eat when they're under stress. There's a double whammy when you overeat when you're under stress because we're naturally drawn to those fatty, salty, sweet foods. It's very, very rare that someone says, I'm feeling really, really stressed, I think I'll have a fruit salad. It just doesn't happen, yeah. It's, I want to go for McDonald's and I'll maybe drop by on Ben and Jerry's on the way home, yeah. Now, the problem with that is that there's scientific research that shows that when we are stressed, our body's ability to metabolize fats and salt is reduced. So what I'm doing is I'm filling my body with fatty foods just at a time when I can't process them as effectively, okay? Which is why I might put weight on when I'm under stress. There's also procrastination, which there is indecision. This was classic for me when I was in a highly stressed, highly pressurised job. I'd put decisions off and say, look, I'm thinking about it. I wouldn't really be thinking about it, I'd just say I was. And then when the deadline came on to make a decision, I'd drop down to the next couple of words and I'd make a risky or reckless decision because I hadn't really been thinking about it. I'd just been in fight, flight or freeze, probably freeze, because I was afraid to make a decision. And then we've got the other things like addictions, and it's really interesting because having a drink after work is okay as a relaxant, but if it becomes too much of a habit and it starts to go on the increase, it's going to start to become a detriment to our health. People recognise that with alcohol, they recognise it with drugs, they don't always recognise it with a few of the other addictions we're seeing, such as work addiction and also shopping, which of course we make it sound benign because we name it retail therapy. So the reason I raise these behaviours is this is the most likely way you're going to recognise your stress and your behaviours. And you know, these are the areas you might want to start effecting some control.
Julian, I was just going to say there that obviously if people are suffering from any addictions, then there are external agencies that can help with alcohol addiction, drugs, not necessarily work addiction or shopping addiction, it has to be said, but it's worthwhile remembering that they're there. So if you see yourself or a colleague going down that path, it is worth getting in touch with those organisations. And of course, the solicitors have their own kind of organisation that can help with stress and work stress. You can phone someone up and get a bit of help if you need to. So it's worth, you know, contacting the SRA. It's worth reaching out to somebody if you think that you're going down that slippery slope. And of course, the thing that's really worrying is the risk-taking recklessness. When you're a solicitor and you're under stress, the last thing you want to do is suddenly become reckless in the work that you're doing. And that's what somebody else was saying earlier, which is, you know, the fear of making mistakes can sometimes exacerbate the problem, can't it? It can make you more reckless in what you're doing just because you're suffering the stress.
You've got it, yeah, absolutely, absolutely right. Okay, so the next slide, and this is just really how often it comes out in our communications and our culture and the way that we communicate with other people, be it by email, text, or face-to-face. And typically it comes out in three basic communication styles. We've either got aggressive, in other words, just aggressive, or passive-aggressive, or we have assertive. And really part of my life's work these days is to encourage people and educate and help them be assertive in their communication. It's very, very rare in the workplace, and I'm sure people here might be typing into the chat box. No, it isn't. But it is really quite rare that behaviours in work become aggressive. It's only broadly about 10% of the time that people act out their stress in an aggressive way. What normally happens is they act out their stress and their conflict through passive aggression. So passive aggression is where maybe Mena and I are in conflict, and I say to Mena, look, it's okay, it doesn't matter because I'm passive aggressive and I don't like to admit when I'm angry. But of course, what I will do is I will get my revenge. Okay, and what happens is that when Mena's back is turned, I'll stab her in the back by telling everybody who I know how horrible she's been to me. You know, we'll go and have coffee pot conferences with people and tell them how horrible she is to me. If Mena and I are presenting something to the board and she needs my support, it's the ideal time for me to sabotage her. Okay, and the classic thing I'll do is I'll use sarcasm and I'll withhold communication. So next time she comes and speak to me, I either will blank her or she says, can you do me a favour? I'll say, what, you're talking to me now, are you? You know? These are all the behaviours that go on in 85 to 90% of workplaces and also at home. And what we're trying to do is encourage people actually to be healthy and assertive in the behaviours and to clear the air on a regular basis and be honest with people about how they're feeling, but to do it in a very, very healthy way. If I had more time, I'd talk you through the model for that, but that's really more about the assertive communication rather than the stress. I just want you to recognise how it comes out in the way that we communicate. Okay. Should we move on to the last slide, Mena?
I just want to say that somebody's chimed in and said, very helpfully actually, that there is actually a Workaholics Anonymous group, which I wasn't aware of. So
No.
worth getting in touch with Workaholics Anonymous. We haven't found anywhere that's Shopping Anonymous, but definitely a Workaholics Anonymous group.
There'll be one somewhere, I'm sure. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so a few tips. I said I wanted to give you something to help you with stress. Hopefully, I've already started to open your mind up to the way that we draw stress into our lives, and by showing you that model and actually give you an insight into your own stress. What there is also, though, is that there's, well, let me go through these tips for you. First of all, recognise there is no greater stress than which I put upon myself. In other words, 80% of my stress is about me. The sooner we get that over, then the sooner we, as humans, can start dealing with our stress and stop blaming other people. Okay. Do make time for yourself. That sounds so trite, but allowing yourself a proper lunch break, allowing yourself to go home at a decent time, allowing yourself to have activities outside of work that are good for you and nourish your soul are really, really important to dealing with stress. And then I'd like to talk just for a minute about breathe. When we're stressed, we don't breathe properly, and there's a lot of work going on around breathing, but it's very, very clear that if you breathe in a healthy way, it encourages your parasympathetic nervous system to process stress hormones, and it actually improves your health and well-being. So let me tell you how to breathe. I'm assuming that most of you are sitting down listening to this, so if you've got your feet flat on the ground and you're sitting reasonably upright, all you need to do is start taking a nice deep breath and counting your breath for a count of 7. And then as you exhale, count out for a count of 11. It's important you exhale slower than you inhale, and it's important you keep counting your breath in and counting your breath out. If you could make time of 2 minutes out of every hour to stop what you're doing and breathe deeply like that for 2 minutes out of every hour, you will immediately improve the focus and energy you've got for the work that you're doing, and you will immediately start to make a difference to your health and well-being. And that's all from just choosing to breathe in a really, really healthy way. Now, I recognise that the way your jobs work, you might not be able to religiously do that every hour, 2 minutes out of every hour. But what I'd really like is for people to have a go at that. And I'd love to get an email off someone at some point in the future saying, you know what, this really works. Because, you know what, it does. It really, really does. And then the other thing that goes with breathing is that a lot of us lose sleep when we are under stress. And there's a lot of ways we can relax. There's a really good app out there that we can download onto our phones. It's called Headspace. It's free. They will try to sell you stuff because that's what free apps do, but the free version has got some very, very good guided visualizations in them, and you can use them to either relax at work or to relax before you go to sleep at night. And if you use them for 10 minutes before you go to sleep at night, again, I can guarantee you will have better sleep. And if you have better sleep, then you're going to be healthier and you're going to deal with your stress in a more constructive way. So my 2 key tips are use relaxation techniques such as Headspace, the app, and learn to breathe healthily more regularly. And then finally, learn to manage your relationship with the big picture. And that is about those 5 pillars of stress that I've introduced you to. Start thinking about your relationship with needing to be in control. Think about your relationship with your need for approval. And start to think about your relationship with those other 3 pillars. Because as you start to think on that, you're already directing your attention to changing your relationship with stress. Okay. We're almost out of time, and I thought we might go to some questions. Is there any burning questions that anybody's got to ask at the moment?
So I'm going to encourage people to ask questions, but also say that with regards to that breathing exercise, if you're standing at the kettle waiting for the kettle to boil, it's a good time to work on your breathing. So it's a good chance just to stand there while you're waiting for the kettle or making some tea or, you know, doing something else, just to do the 7 count in and the 11 count out, because I think that's really, really helpful. I'll also, while people are presumably typing away, open a poll question. So I'm going to open this poll question that I'm going to launch, which is about CPD. So it's just really to gauge whether or not you know whether your firms are going to be moving on to the new CPD scheme sooner rather than later. If you can vote in the poll, that would be really helpful. So the poll is in the same place as your question box is, and if you're typing a question away, then we'll get to answer it as soon as we can. While you're doing that, I've put up some information about Julian's business, which is Calm People, and if you want to get in touch with Julian, as I have, there are various ways that you can connect with him on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can look up his website and contact him with any questions that you may have had that we haven't answered, which would be really helpful. And it's interesting with regards to the poll, which I'm going to close, that most of you have voted, and you've said that most of you don't know when your firm's going to be moving over onto the new scheme for CPD. And of course, under the new CPD scheme, you won't be restricted to hours-based CPD, and things like this webinar, even watching this webinar on our YouTube channel, where we've got several other webinars that you can watch, would count towards your CPD. So really helpful that you've been able to vote on that poll. Just also to finish off with Julian's biography, so if you want to get in touch with him or know a bit more about him, his direct email address is on that final slide. Julian, I don't see that we have any other questions that are burning or outstanding, so it's probably a good time to draw the webinar to a close. Just a reminder for those of you who are still there that there's a feedback questionnaire, and we'd be really grateful if you could take that, and for me to thank Julian for his time in presenting this stress webinar for us today. Thank you, Julian.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
So if you have any other questions, email myself, that's my email address, email Julian, get in touch with us directly, but thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you'll take another one of our webinars very soon. Thank you.